This All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to CPED, Community Planning and Economic Development. Lovely to see so many people here in the gallery. Is there a way to close that door? I don't know, it's a bit of excitement going on out there. Oh, it's Sam, that's the excitement. Oh. Always causing a ruckus, aren't you, Councillor Austin? Okay, I think we're ready now. So I'd like to call this meeting to order. I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement that Halifax Regional Municipality is located on Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. The municipality acknowledges the peace and friendship treaties signed in this territory and recognizes that we are all treaty people. I just want to confirm that we have quorum here, and we actually have a couple of guests as well. Yeah, so nice to see Councillor Morris is here, and Councillor Stoddard coming in for CPED today. Nice to have you here. We'll start with approval of the minutes from February 16th, 2023. Call for approval of the minutes. Okay, moved by Councillor Blackburn, seconded by Deputy Mayor Austin. And approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions.
There have been no additions or deletions from the clerk's office.
All right, excellent. So we want to move the order of business. Councillor Austin and Councillor Smith. Business arising out of the minutes. There is none. Call for declaration of conflict of interest. Anybody? No. All right. Motions of reconsideration. There are none. Motions of rescission. None. Consideration of deferred business. None. And notices of tabled matters. There are none. Correspondence, petitions, and delegations. Madam Clerk, is there any correspondence?
Correspondence has been received for item 10.3.2 and has been circulated to all members of the committee.
Thank you. And are there any petitions to be presented this morning?
No petitions from the clerk's office.
Right, thank you. So we will move right on to presentations. And first up on the list, we have item 10.3.1, the Backlands, a cornerstone of our city's green network. And we have Dr. Boris Verm and Karine Tay here to present this morning. So welcome. So I think as you know, you have 10 minutes to speak, and Katie here will keep track of time and give you a 30, it says here, yeah, 30 second, let you know when 30 seconds are remaining, and then there'll be an opportunity for members of CPED to ask questions and for you to respond. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Chair, and thank you, dear councillors, for hearing us out on the Backlands. Karine and I are here today to represent the Backlands Coalition, which is a large coalition of citizen groups and neighborhood groups and non-governmental organizations in HRM with the mission to prevent further loss of wildlife habitat in the Backlands and to preserve the Backlands for future generations. If I could have my slides.
If you could just open it up on the computer there, then the AV will be able to take it over.
Okay. All right. So, as I said, the Backlands Coalition is a large coalition of various groups that have come together to protect the backlands for both their natural but also their historical, cultural conservation value, as well as an educational and recreational resource. We recognize that HRM is now officially the second fastest growing urban area in Canada, and with that growth comes opportunities and risks. We see some of the risks in that the quality of life and the sustainability of our green spaces is threatened, and that we need to be very judicious in which green spaces do get developed into housing or other developments, and which ones are kept for both for people and for nature, and we recognize those twin values. Just to tell you a little bit about who we are, so there's a number of associations here, such as the McIntosh Run Watershed Association, which we will hear from Karen, who's one of their representatives, and a number of people from the area. I personally live in Ferguson's Cove, but we have people from around the Backlands area. We're also part of the HRM Alliance, and we align with their vision of a sustainable city, and also with a city that's climate change resilient, and we recognize that aligns very well with HRM's Green Network Plan and also the Halifax program, both of which we enthusiastically support. Just to give you a little bit of background, if you're one of the few people who haven't been hiking in the Backlands, here's where it is. It's on the Chebucto Peninsula, District 11. The bordering communities of Spyfield, Williams Lake, Purcell's Cove, Ferguson's Cove, where I live, Herring Cove, where Karen lives, and Green Acres. We have one of the newest parks in HRM, which is the Shaw Wilderness Park, which was developed in collaboration with the Nature Conservancy. We have, of course, the McIntosh Run Watercourse, which is developed very carefully for responsible recreational use by the Watershed Association. We'll hear more about that. And from a biological point of view, we have a globally rare ecosystem that dominates this area, which is the so-called Jack Pine Broom Crowberry Barrens. It's a fire-dependent, fire-resistant ecosystem that's, as I said, globally rare and threatened, and even in Nova Scotia is exceedingly rare, and we have a large aggregation of it here in the Backlands, which is one of the major conservation values that are recognized. From a planning point of view, we're talking to the Planning Committee and the Community Development Committee. It's a patchwork of HRM parklands, such as the Shaw Wilderness, HRM protected areas, areas that are protected by private donors through the Nova Scotia Nature Trust. We just last month, we had a big celebration in Purcell's Cove. We were quite overwhelmed by how many people showed up. Over 100 people showed up to celebrate the landowners who so graciously donated their land for this wider vision, which is now taking hold in the community. I should mention that we also had a letter writing campaign last year that garnered over 1,500 signatures, not just from our neighborhoods, but across HRM, Nova Scotia, and even from out of province. There's a large holding of Crown land here. There's many private landowners, and there's development, and you see the areas in brown kind of encroaching on this area and kind of eating away at the margins. And we're very concerned that critical wildlife corridors that connect this area to the Herring Cove Backlands, but also to Long Lake Provincial Park, and then further on to the Terrence Bay Wilderness, are being closed by these developments. So we think we need to take a good look at this area and make sure that the opportunities for wildlife to move about, but also for people to have access to this area are preserved. Why is this area special? Apart from its ecological value, it's also the closest, most accessible wilderness to the HRM core. HRM, of course, being the largest urban center in eastern Canada. As such, it's a unique area that juxtaposes an accessible wilderness, we call it our backyard wilderness, with a large urban, rapidly growing urban center. It's home to a number of threatened and endangered habitats and species, such as the mainland moose, the Jack Pine Broom Crowberry Barrens that I mentioned, threatened species such as the snapping turtle that is nesting here, and endangered birds such as nightjars. I should mention that my background is in conservation biology. I'm a professor at Dell, have been teaching conservation biology there for 20 years, so I'm very passionate about the biological assets we have here, but I recognize at the same time, being a resident of the community and talking to people who hike in the backlands all the time, that it also holds an equally large value for people. So to talk a little bit more about that, I'll give over to my co-presenter, Karen Tay.
Yeah. Good morning. Thanks for the opportunity to address you all. The Backlands Coalition includes several member associations. The Macintosh Run Watershed Association is one of those member associations, forming a broad coalition of support for the conservation of the backlands. The Macintosh Run is a river that flows from Long Lake through Spryfield, across the backlands, and into the ocean at Herring Cove. MARWA was founded in 1994 with the mandate to protect the Macintosh Run River and its watershed. We've been building trails since 2016 to provide muscle-powered access to the backlands, with the goals of fostering appreciation for the area in its natural state and contributing to a healthier, happier human community. So far, our volunteers have invested about 12,500 volunteer hours to building and maintaining the trails. The trails are built for muscle-powered users on foot and bikes. They are single track, which means about the width of one user. We follow sustainable building practices and plan the trails carefully to avoid wetlands and minimize erosion. So far, we have about 23 kilometers of trails, shown by the green lines on the map, and have been approved for an additional 16 kilometers of trail, shown in pink. The trail system connects to several neighborhoods in Spryfield and Herring Cove, and is only 5 kilometers from downtown Halifax. There are Metro Transit stops at both ends and in the middle of the trail system, which improves equity of access. In fall of 2021, we conducted a trail user survey answered by 430 people. Over half of trail users who replied to the survey were from other parts of Halifax, outside of the immediate local area. Access to these wild lands is extremely important to residents from all parts of Halifax. I am sure that all of you have constituents who cherish the backlands and support protection of this wild landscape. The survey posed specific questions to visitors from outside of Halifax to estimate the contribution of the trails to the tourism economy of Halifax. Visiting the backlands was a major draw for 62% of visitors who responded to the survey, and 98% of them said they were very likely or certain to return to Halifax to visit the backlands. The survey showed responders said that out-of-town visitors to the backlands spent about $570 each during their stay in Halifax. Tourism is just one way that the trails in the backlands contribute to the local economy. Other contributions include purchasing gear at local stores, increasing local property values, reducing health care costs due to healthier, happier residents, and attracting and retaining skilled workers and the businesses that rely on them. We have heard from many trail users that they had considered moving somewhere else that had greater opportunities for outdoor recreation, but now they've decided to stay and raise their families in Halifax. We have also heard from people who visited the trails from away and have decided to move to Halifax because of this amazing, accessible wilderness. One of the reasons that people value wild spaces is that when we spend time in nature, we feel better. This study in Australia looked at the mental health care savings and workplace productivity improvements related to visits to nature parks, and concluded that these contribute about 2.5% of GDP each year. Halifax can't afford not to invest in the protection of the backlands.
So with that, we would like to conclude our presentation and make a pitch to you that the Backlands is an essential cornerstone of the Halifax Green Network Plan because of their accessibility, their closeness to urban centers, also to immigrant communities and underserved communities. It's a backyard wilderness to our area, and as such, it needs to be preserved. And we have the infrastructure now to serve people in this area, and in fact, I feel we need to include to widen this network to other areas once we've protected the backlands. I also want to make a very quick point that the backlands is not suitable for housing development. It's a very rough terrain. It's fire dependent, as we said. There has been a huge fire there in 2009 that you may well remember. It started exactly around this time of year in very dry conditions like we have now. And it destroyed a large number of homes that had been built in the area. Since then, development has further been encroaching on this area, and we think that it's neither a safe nor a suitable place for development, and it's much better suited for other uses that are being in the area right now. So our final 30 seconds, we like to respectfully ask the committee to consider to recognize the backlands as a foundational piece of the Halifax Green Network. We recognize there's rapid development on both sides of Herring Cove Road now that's quickly eliminating corridors for both wildlife and people to move into the area and use the area. And we feel that we're lacking an appropriate zone in municipal bylaws that reflects the need for protection for the backlands and similar areas like that. With that, we'd like to thank you very much for your attention, and we'll be happy to discuss with you further.
All right, thank you very much, and great timing on that. It's almost like it was rehearsed. Okay, so now it's time for some questions from the committee. I'll start with Councillor Trish Purdy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much for that presentation. And yeah, I agree. Don't want to touch this beautiful nature piece in HRM. We're so blessed here in Halifax. We have the urban and the rural and the wild nature. It's just a beautiful place. So just a question of clarification. On the map that you showed with the zonings, it looked like most of the zoning in the backland area is already protected area or holding. I'm assuming that's Crown holding areas. So are you looking for something more? Are you afraid that those zonings could be changed to accommodate development and further encroach on the land? And also on that same map there, the developer land was kind of surrounding this area. So I'm not all that familiar with this area. Does that mean that all of the development able land is already fully developed, or are you afraid it's going to continue kind of creeping in to the protected areas?
Yeah, it can certainly continue. So there's next to Shaw Wilderness, for example, there's 2 large parcels that are privately owned, very large parcels of many acres that could be developed right now. Their development value is low under the current zoning, which is urban reserve, which is going to change because it's recognized that this place will never see urban development, partly because, I forgot to mention this, we don't have sewer and water, at least on the Purcell's Cove side. So it can't be urban development, it won't be urban development, and it's recognized for different values now that are not in the original designation of urban development. So what can it be rezoned? That's actually a question that triggered a lot of the concern of the community, because we felt if it was rezoned in a way that these large parcels, for example, could be subdivided, then maybe not urban development, but definitely suburban development that would compromise the value of this area. So we suggest there might be a new zone that recognizes the conservation value, freezes the footprint of 1 house per lot, because there's a lot of private land here, some of it which is very large, and also creates incentives for landowners to do conservation easements on their private land.
Oh, okay, so you're looking for more specific requirements for the urban reserve designations in that area?
Well, it won't be urban reserve, so it will be rezoned because it's not an urban reserve.
Okay.
It's an urban parkland, really. That's
Right.
what we're looking for.
Okay.
But what do we do with the already private holdings that are substantial in this area? What are the rules for those? And I'm not an expert for how to do that technically, but we've been talking to the planners. The planners do see the problem. They kind of agree that it's not an area that's very suitable for development and that it has many other values and uses, and those need to be preserved. But how to move about that, I think, is still up in the air.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Councillor Purdy. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. The question I just have, sorry, I'm losing my voice a little. So, like, you know, when we think about these lands, particularly the private lands, you know, there's always that thorny, you know, like we're dealing with Birch Cove, Blue Mountain, where if it's privately owned, it's not park. If we zone it as park, then that takes on obligation for us to purchase. But that doesn't mean necessarily that you just have the right to build a whole bunch of subdivisions, right? You know, there's existing land rights, you know, timber, all that kind of stuff, which probably is not something we would want either in these situations. But what I'm wondering about is, you know, have you been engaging with the whole regional plan process? Because, I mean, that's where we're talking about, like, the green network pieces coming into actually having some standing and some force of effect is through that. And I imagine that that would link in rather importantly to this chunk of land.
100%, and we're very engaged with that process. We've commented extensively on that process for many years now, because the Shaw Wilderness Park has been about 10 years in the making. This has a long history. There's a long history of community stewardship here, which is part of why I'm proud to be part of this community. There's a strong value that people, a strong connection that people have to this land, and they've been very engaged with the regional and municipal processes, and talking to people and making comments and so on. So we're very aware of the various phases that are phase 3, phase 4, and what that means for this area, and some of the risks that are associated with redesignating the zoning for these lands.
Okay, so, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to just kind of organize in my own head, and not knowing this anywhere near as well as you or any of the local councilors, right? You know, one of the big joys of being a regional councilor is you cross into communities that you don't necessarily know as well. I guess what I'm kind of wondering is your asks, is it kind of more of a heads up for us? Because, I mean, I get that most of the stuff, it's coming, I think is coming to us as part of the regional plan process. I'm not sure if there's anything the committee or council needs to do this second where that other regional plan, green network piece is rolling down the pipe.
Correct. Our mission is to make you aware of the value of this land and the support it has in the community for finding an alternative way of developing now that it won't be an urban reserve, and that the community is very passionate, very united to make this area a parkland for all Haligonians and all Nova Scotians, in fact. And I should mention that we had a meeting with 3 levels of government last year. So our Member of Parliament, our local MLA, and our Councillor Patty Cottell were there to unite behind this vision. And in principle, everybody agrees there's the possibility for some federal funding, because you very rightly said we might need to purchase some of those lands, as happened in Shaw successfully. And we do feel we're building support for that. I will also talk on Monday to the Mi'kmaq Conservation Group, part of the Confederation of Mainland Mi'kmaq up in Millbrook. They have an interest in this area because they see a lot of their ancestral roots in the Chiboucto Peninsula, and this is a core part of that area. So I want to learn more from them, what's their history in the area and how they can support our cause as well. There is a new designation. It's called Healing Forest or Reconciliation Forest. There's one in Cape Breton. Maybe this could be our first on the mainland. That's the vision we've been discussing with them.
Okay. Well, thank you for the presentation, for all the work on this. I I do have just a few seconds left here. I will just say, you know, it's an interesting, like, as this all kind of comes, as we get more of an assemblage of land there, it does create some interesting challenges for land management, isn't it? Where you have a fire-dependent landscape, but, you know, the ethos in you know, society for a long time, I mean, we had a big fire, so we're probably good for now, but, you know, if you don't have fire on this landscape, the very environment that's unique and precious here goes away. So that's creates some interesting land management dynamics.
And if I can just very briefly answer to that from a conservation biology perspective, I think as a species, we are learning to now integrate with nature and to live with nature, and particularly with wild nature. And in Canada, we have a unique opportunity to do that. I was born and raised in Germany, and we have lost that opportunity there many hundreds of years ago. We're slowly rediscovering how to do that. And I think here we have a really golden opportunity to preserve access to real wilderness. And that includes some of these risks that, of course, need to be managed and recognized and taken into account.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Morse.
Thank you very much. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the globally rare plant species and plant communities that are there. And because they're globally rare, I'm wondering if there are ways that HRM could incorporate in our planning and zoning the recommendations of international bodies when it comes to conservation. So just if you could give us your perspective on whether there is international recognition of these sites and how that might help us in our zoning.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor. That's very close to my heart, of course. Yeah, these are, if you have ever visited Cape Breton National Park, they have a specific trail there that highlights the jack pine, and it's not this exact one, it's not the jack pine broom crowberry, but it's kind of related, and it highlights the cycle of growth and fire and growth and how that works, and how much of Nova Scotia it doesn't have this anymore. So it is definitely regionally recognized. Some of the threatened species we have are, of course, internationally recognized as well, because they're internationally threatened all the same, or nationally under COSAVIC and SARA, the Species at Risk Act, as well, for example, the mainland moose. I also want to note that Canada, of course, committed to protecting 30% of their land surface by 2030. Here in HRM, I think we have a responsibility to do our part, particularly where we can at the same time help people to learn about wilderness and to learn about our place in nature and how to relate properly to nature. And I think the McIntosh Run Association has done a fantastic job to create opportunities for that. And I want to say maybe with some more federal funding, we could, even if this got a proper park designation, we could maybe increase the opportunities for education and for people to understand more about these threatened species and habitats. We're offering these bird walks together with the Halifax Library. You're very welcome to participate in them. There's a couple coming up. We have migration season right now. We see amazing bird life out there right now. And that's an opportunity for people to immerse themselves and learn about this natural environment and how to behave properly. Again, something I feel we have maybe a little bit lost in our culture, and we need to rediscover.
Is there a national recognition of this particular area or a designation that we could apply for or something like that? Are you aware of it? Because some sites that are rare have been recognized, not necessarily by UNESCO, but there are other organizations that.
Yeah, I'm not aware. Because the Canadian Endangered Species Law works for species, not for habitats. This is a particular rare habitat. So there is rare species in there that are recognized and protected, but the habitat itself is not, because we don't have a mechanism for that per se. But I know that among, in my community of biologists and naturalists in Nova Scotia, it's very much recognized, and people come there all the time. I should mention lichen as well. There's lichen communities that are found nowhere else. So, but yeah, we don't have a designation in Canada for threatened habitats, unfortunately. And even under SARA, habitat protection is a weak link.
Okay, thanks for pointing that out. So I think that is a real gap that we might be able to address, because in Canada, where our legislation is behind, sort of falling behind where things are going. We protect one species at a time, but those species are threatened because their habitats are threatened, but we don't have a legal mechanism for the habitats. So I think that's why we're in a bit of a gap situation here. So thank you for highlighting that.
Remember when Sarah was passed in 2004 or 5, I commented many times in the media on this very fact that this is like, you wanted to protect Haligonians, but you're not going to protect the infrastructure and the housing, right? Somehow they're going to survive by themselves if we sort of protect them. And it just doesn't work that way, neither for people nor for plants and animals.
We have to get better at the interconnections, and yeah, thank you.
I agree, and I feel that the Green Network Plan has some of that in it, and Halifax as well has that provision to recognize the importance of green spaces for shading and for flood buffers and storm buffers and so on. And so I think we can leverage a lot of that.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Morris. And if the committee would permit, if I could speak from the chair? Yeah, thanks. So I just want to thank everyone for coming here. And I know, there's a lot of groups in this area that are working together with the united effort to protect the backlands, recognizing, the urgency that exists right now due to the development pressure. And, to the Deputy Mayor's comments about, why are you here? I think it's because we need to really, highlight the threats to the wildlife corridors, the threats to the integrity of the landscape that exist right now. Because there is a lot of urban reserve and holding, and it's what happens to those lands in the future that I think we can have a hand in directing how that happens to minimize the impact. For those that weren't at the Environment and Sustainability Committee, these groups have been talking with staff, as have I, and in the regional plan review, they are recognizing the importance of the wildlife connections on the Chebucto Peninsula and prioritizing that is part of the regional plan review. So I think it's just really important that we continue to have those dialogues, because again, it's the groups that are active in this area that really understand the landscape best. And as a regional council, we don't always get the opportunity to intimately understand the different landscapes throughout our very large municipalities. So I think it is very good that you come and present and kind of inform and educate us all. An open invitation to anyone here who wants to go for a walk in the backlands. Happy to do that. I know Councillor Smith and I had talked about it earlier, so we should make that happen. And as well, I highly recommend going for a bird walk with Fulton Lavender, who it is an experience that you will not soon forget. I can tell you, he's pretty incredible. I also just want to mention that when you presented at the Environment and Sustainability Committee, there is the discussion about how we don't have the ability right now to subdivide. People don't have the ability to subdivide their private property for conservation purposes. So, subdivision is just not allowed under some of the zoning. And that there are opportunities for people who have, if you looked at that map at the long, skinny lots that go back kilometers, that aren't developable. There's nothing you can do with it, but there is an opportunity to protect them into the future if we can figure out how to allow people to subdivide and donate that land for conservation purposes. So I know staff are working on this. I got a note from Lee Perrin about how they've drafted a policy supporting provision in the regional subdivision bylaw that would allow for the ability to subdivide for conservation purposes. So that is in the work. There's still more work that needs to be done on that, really, in particular, like what are we allowed to do? Are we allowed to do that under a charter or not? But that is part of the regional plan review, and I think that's a benefit not just to the backlands, but that would be a benefit to all of HRM, where particularly where we have the Green Network Plan pieces of the Green Network Plan and development abutting onto it, or private property abutting onto it. So I just want to say, thanks again for your presentation, and look forward to more discussions. And just because you're all from my district here, I'm going to take a photo of you here from the seat. There we go.
And I'll take the opportunity.
Wave. Though this phone's beginning to, my iPhone 7's beginning to die here. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you everyone for your attention and your engagement, and also for the foresight in green lighting the Green Network Plan, which is, I think, aligns very well with what we're talking about here. So thanks again.
All right, thank you. So we have another presentation. We have, next up, we have 10.3.2, Friends of Halifax Commons, and we have Peggy Cameron, and I see Howard Epstein's here as well. Come on up. As you know, you have 10 minutes to speak, and Katie here will keep track of time and give you a 30-second warning when you're coming to the end of the 10 minutes, and then there'll be an opportunity for questions from the committee.
And thank you for the opportunity to present. And I'd also like to thank the Backland Coalition for a great launch pad. There's so many examples of what they're talking about are so relevant to the Friends of Halifax Common and the Halifax Common. My name is Peggy Cameron. I'm a co-founder of the Friends of Halifax Common in 2007. We have about 3,000 people that we regularly update. And I'll just give a little bit of a background on why we're here today, and then my co-director, Howard Epstein, will continue. We were founded because the original grant to the inhabitants of the town of Halifax as Common Forever was in 1763, and it was for 240 acres. And although it's a legacy of a colonial time, it's actually one of the only examples where we have a shared ownership and a shared responsibility. Many of you may not be aware that it goes from South Street all the way along Roby up to Kennard, down North Park, Ahern, Bell, and then South Park. And in our present time, only 20% of that entire 240 acres remains as public open space. And off that entire space, about 20% is used for surface parking lot. So the 1994 Halifax Common Plan committed the city to retain and to recapture and not give up any lands on the Halifax Common. This shows the plan from that document at that time. And in the past few years, city has been engaged in public consultation to develop a master plan for the Halifax Common. In 2021, this committee was given the chance to review the document, even though it was 500 pages and it had only been available for 5 days. And you requested that or you recommended to council that it come back to the public for further consultation. So that has happened, and now Howard's going to speak to what our submission was that we gave as feedback to the actual document. And I would say it took thousands of hours on the part of our directors to go through the document.
Thank you very much. The Friends of the Halifax Common group put a lot of effort into writing a submission to the public consultation process. So we made observations at length with respect to what has been generated as a replacement for the 1994 plan. Although to some extent it rather looks as if it's a critique of what it is that's been generated, we found a great deal to admire in the document. Primarily, I have to say, with respect to the research and knowledge that went into setting out the background, the historic and geographic background with respect to the common, and setting a context for it, but necessarily a document that makes suggestions is going to have aspects of a critique in it. But as I said, there is much to admire in the draft plan, although we saw a bit of a disconnect between the research that was done by the consultants and the final recommendations. And although I'm going to go through with you the different classes of points that we did make, I really want to flag for you the two main things that I think really emerge from our thinking here. And one is that there should be more and different public consultation before this document goes any further. And by more and different, I mean a recognition that what's happened so far has really been online, and an invitation to the public to put in written consultation. And although there is a certain amount of effectiveness that goes along with that, it's not quite the same thing as in-person meetings, which I think we can engage with a lot more now that we have, at least for the most part, come out of the intense COVID period that we've been in. So it would be responsive, I think, to what is an extensive public interest and demand for being consulted about what goes on the Halifax Common if this process were to continue. The second main point that really emerges from our thinking is that very strong protections are needed for the Halifax Common, and they're absent and not really recommended in this plan. I don't know if you recall the staff presentation when the draft plan really came to council, but it was clear that what was contemplated was a document of informal guidance. That is, no official status for the new plan, that it was not being recommended as being incorporated into the municipal planning strategy or any parts of it. It wasn't recommended that there be legislative changes. You will know from looking at the HRM charter that there are specific sections that offer protections and guidance for how the Dartmouth Common is to be treated, but there are no such sections in the HRM charter that deal with the Halifax Common. And this is what I have in mind when I speak to the idea of strong protections, that there should be amendments to the HRM charter, and there should be MPS strategies and policies that flow from the plan itself. So I would ask members of council to keep these in mind as they engage with this process as it goes forward. So you'll see that there's a list of presentation themes. The first is the question of public consultation options. I think I've really just spoken to that. There are virtues in what's happened so far, but really we're hoping that HRM will extend and continue with a different matter of consultation, different manner of consultation that's really engages in person with the public, so that the public is gathered. We know that when that's happened in the past, that many people have come forward and been quite willing to participate of an evening or an afternoon to talk about what it is that they see as being valued for the common. Second main point is this question of protecting the common as a whole. As Peggy Cameron just said, originally the grant of the common went all the way down to South Street, and this is still the case, that this is common land. That is what the common is, but it's also the case that the plan as generated didn't include the whole of the original grant of the common, and the part that really is that was excluded, that is of serious importance, is the Wanderers Block. And of course, there's a lot of different usages that are being made of the Wanderers Block, and some rationalization would be appropriate, and some thinking about that as part of the overall planning would be appropriate. There are other parts that also of the original common that weren't looked at in the plan. So we would ask that council keep that in mind. The third point we want to turn to is this question of reclaiming and expanding the public's leisure space. I mean, this is a kind of unusual kind of space. It's not like the Backlands itself. It's not like a kind of dedicated park. It's the common, and it was granted for and is kind of recreation area for the general public. And what emerged from the public consultations that were held in the past is an overwhelming desire on the part of the public to see that there be open space that is essentially unstructured. And yet, of course, what we have seen has been a series of decisions over time, one by one, in which the land of the common has been restructured, built on, parked on, for a variety of things that are not consistent with this idea that the public has consistently expressed. So we're hoping that council will keep in mind the possibility, and this was something that was flagged in the 1994 plan, that there be expansion of the common and reclaiming, if this is possible. I see I've gone on longer than I'd thought, and it's time to wrap up. But you will see that the themes that we spoke to and have written about are set out. But I would ask you again to think about those two main points I made at the beginning: strong protections, further and different consultation before we go ahead with it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we have some questions from the committee. We'll start with Councillor Stoddard.
Thank you very much for this presentation. This is relatively new to me, and I'm glad to be able to attend this meeting. You spoke a little bit about the Dartmouth Commons having protection. I wonder if you could speak a little bit about that so we know what the Halifax Commons is missing. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. The legal status of the Halifax Common is really ambiguous. When the original Royal Charter was issued, the Common was given to the citizens of Halifax forever, and it's not clear exactly what force that document has, and because there is no statutory protection, there's nothing in the HRM Charter. When HRM wanted to build on the Common, for example, the swimming pool now or the oval before, it actually had to go to the legislature and ask for specific legislation to authorize HRM to go ahead with building on the common. Now, building on the common is not something we're speaking in favor of, but I have to say that it can't be satisfactory for HRM to be in that situation. The Dartmouth Common does have sections that are in there. It doesn't go back very far, and I think really was prompted by the plan to put in a bus terminal that encroached a bit on the Dartmouth Common, and at that point there was recognition amongst the members of the legislature who were situated in Dartmouth that something needed to be done, and legislation was passed in the form of those amendments to the HRM charter that offered protections to it okayed the terminal, but offered protections to the charter, and it's not clear to me why it never happened for the Halifax Common. Don't know.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Stoddard. Councillor Morris.
I could just interject there in response to Councillor Stoddard's question. There is mention in the planning document about potentially being a cultural landscape, but there's nothing in any legislative level, at the municipal level or at the provincial level, that has any governance around how we would have a cultural landscape. So I was thinking about Councillor Morris's question to the Backlands people. If we had a cultural landscape, that could be something that could look at more broadly at environmental, cultural, social, and economic aspects, and how we would protecting those, and environmental certainly in a more cohesive manner. So that's an opportunity maybe the city could take to work with the province and really push to have their idea or their commitment and our wishes around having a cultural landscape be an actual regulated concept. And then internationally, I was thinking in response to Councillor Moore's question that, there is also the potential for something like a biosphere reserve.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peggy. I do know that Heritage is looking at cultural landscapes, and I think there is a proposal to the province that we're waiting for approval on. How it applies in the situation, I don't know, but it is something we can follow up on. Councillor Ouhit.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for being here this morning, folks. It's nice to see you and nice to hear you. I think we all, recently not that long ago, went through the whole concern over the parking and whatnot for the hospital, and I think a number of folks came together and led by Councillor Mason to try and voice our concern about that. The concern, and your presentation made a lot of sense to me, except that when you talk about reclaim, and reclaiming is, I just like a little more understanding to that, because, and I think in the past we may have been a little bit offside in our, personally, we all love the common, we all love open space. I thought the Oval was a great thing, and is a great thing. And I think that is people using the common, the common man using the common space for the common good of getting some exercise. And we weren't necessarily on side. And the Wanderers grounds has been a stadium, back to my QEH days. We used to have QEH versus St. Pat's football games there, and, it was wonderful, wonderful time. But I agree that we don't want to lose more of it, even though one would say hospitals are a good cause and whatnot. When you say reclaim, we're not going to bulldoze hospitals, we're not going to bulldoze cemeteries, we're not going to bulldoze the Oval or the stadium. Well, what sort of help me understand what you mean by reclaim and expand?
Reclaim is probably something of a wish list. And clearly, money would be spent, but it would only happen if any of the owners, and by here I really mean private owners rather than public uses like the hospitals and the universities. They're not likely to be contracting and freeing up some of their lands. So it's perhaps more a question of looking at whether it might be possible to expand, and by I expand, I think that the perhaps one opportunity that might present itself is moving towards the Centennial Pool and the lands around the Citadel. So again, I would invite council and staff who are listening to think about the possibility of offsetting what really has been a loss of some of the open space land of the common with some others. Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, and of course, we're excited about what's happening with the old Red Cross building.
Yes.
But the pool, as you know, Howard, is getting near the end of its lifespan.
Yep.
Which makes me sad, because I remember I was there for the opening of it, and now it's old and decrepit, and I hope that doesn't apply to me.
Well,
but anyway,
welcome to old age. Here we are.
but I do know what you mean about that area, so thank you, Howard.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Chair.
Sure. Couple of ways we could be interpreting reclaiming in this time. There have been many missed opportunities to reclaim land on the Halifax Common, going back to the site for the School for the Blind, where the province didn't honor its commitment to have a landscaped park within a park. It was supposed to be 200 trees and a very green space, and if you walk by the VG, you can see that's simply not the case, the parking lot there. Another example was the Grace Maternity Hospital was supposed to revert to the Halifax Common. The Queen Elizabeth High School site, the CBC, those are all opportunities where we've just let real parcels, significant sized parcels of land be taken from the Halifax Common. And I wanted to actually speak to we've never presented before any council member, so sometimes when we're writing things, I feel like our positions are mischaracterized. Friends of Halifax Common were never opposed to the oval. We supported it. What we didn't support was the process. And in many cases, when processes fall down, it's because the public aren't being heard and better alternatives or other options aren't being considered. So in the case of the oval, our position was it was going to be rebuilt anyway. It was a temporary facility. And we said, first of all, we need a plan. That's why we're here. We're still looking for a plan that gives us overall guidance for the common. And our idea was to locate it in the central common, because that is an area where there is a lot of recreational infrastructure. And our reason for that thinking was because there's enough waste heat generated by the chillers from the oval to heat 150 homes. So all of the institutional buildings next to the Central Common, such as the Citadel High School or the Nova Scotia Museum or the hospital, at that time the Queen Elizabeth High School, all of those facilities could have had their heating needs met from waste heat. So it was really, I think it's kind of a metaphor, or it's a symbol of how when we make short-term decisions, or if we don't hear from citizens on what would be other ways of doing things, and we don't have a cohesive plan, sometimes we're not making the best decision. That's one example of a specific idea of how planning affects this. Howard's example of reclaiming could also be, how would we extend the green space? We talk about a green network in kind of the perimeter of HRM, but if you think about what we are confronted with climate change and how we need to be working with nature, we can think about how could we extend the Halifax Common, and this is really a vision that Friends of Halifax Common have been putting forward, to extend it to go to the harbor. We could have a green pathway all the way through Cogswell. We could have a green district all the way to Quinpool Road, down to the Arm, and then we could go north to Africville, and we could go south to Point Pleasant Park. And those are the kind of ideas that we really need to be envisioning for a future where we have more people on the peninsula who are wanting access to green space, and where we really have to be working with nature and not against nature. My third idea, or our idea, about reclaiming is, if you think of, let's give a simple example, if you think of 20% of the Halifax Common, possibly it's 25% now, being dedicated to parking. There's many, many opportunities, starting with requiring landscaping for parking lots. The surface parking lots, they all need to be thinking about how can they recharge watersheds, how can they be habitats for birds, bees, all of the ways that if it was really green space, we'd be having more of a structured idea about how we could work with nature. And many cities, again, around the world are looking at really reclaiming. I was in Munich this past fall, and everyone was down by the river because they were unarming the edges of the river. And that was because they need that district to help absorb water from extreme weather events. We know we are going to have water from extreme weather events. And yet we don't really talk about daylighting freshwater brook. So there's many, many ways that we need a big vision and a short-term vision and how we can get from one to the other.
No, and Madam Chair, thank you very much. I appreciate that explanation on expansion, but also that vision. And I think you and I have always agreed that we'd like to see more trains and fewer cars too. So the trains don't require parking. But anyway, we'll get there someday as we grow. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, folks.
Thanks. Thank you, Councillor Elliott. Deputy Mayor Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. The one that I wanted to ask about is this whole legislative ask thing, because we have a provincial government that is very happy to interfere with special planning areas. We have a provincial government that is happy to put in Bill 225 to potentially overrule whatever we do that might impact in some tangential way housing or development. You know, it's been very much of late, interference in municipal government is in vogue. As the councillor for over in Dartmouth, frankly, I would have to be convinced as to why the Dartmouth protections are actually of benefit, because what I have seen in the community has been things like, well, we have an orchard group that down there, a garden group, that basically we're holding on to a decrepit shed that probably, if we had our own control over the place, would have gone and been replaced with a proper one. But to actually do anything there, even a garden shed, means going off to the legislature for that, right? To me, it's not a good policy situation. And so I'm wondering, you know, like I clearly have a different point of view than you folks on this. What do you think is truly missing that we actually need the provincial government to micromanage what is HRM park space? Like, why do we actually need these in the charter? And especially considering the risk of unintended consequences that seems to come with anything involving the province.
I'll just pull two things out of there. One is the content of what might be in sections of the HRM Charter dealing with the Halifax Common. And that's clearly up for council to think about in some detail as to what it is that you would like to see. But on the plus side, from the perspective of HRM as an administrator of lands, then control over the lands, crisper statement of control over the lands would probably be appropriate. But from the perspective of the public and the fidelity to the original grant, prohibitions that also would bind HRM would also be appropriate. So for example, something that prohibits HRM from selling the common or from leasing it to private entities are probably the kinds of things that that the public would probably like to see in that kind of legislation. As to your other point about the general, well, what should we say, non-responsiveness of the provincial government at this point, our concern is that, so far as I know, HRM has never asked the province for amendments to the HRM charter to protect the common. And I know there's a list, a fairly lengthy list even at this point, I think, of amendments to the HRM charter that the council has asked for, and so far, I think, has not received from the province. At least an initial step would be if HRM Council were to add protections for the common to their list of requests from the province.
I guess what I'm trying to drive at is, what is the problem we're actually trying to solve in putting those protections in? Like, I mean, I think, over the years, our conception of common has changed, right? I mean, we went from well, this is kind of grazing land to a whole bunch of built public uses going on it. And the way, the impression I have now from a lot of the viewpoint is we now think of it as park space, green space, open space, right? So like, the conception of common has evolved over the years. But, do you think like HRM would sell common land at this point, like that we're going to hive off and sell chunks of it? I mean,
well, this is what happened. It's realistic. This is what happened along Spring Garden Road. I mean, that area in the upper part of Spring Garden Road leading up to Roby Street, in fact, was common land and owned and under the control of HRM as part of the common. But the land was sold off. It required special legislation at the time, but it was sold off to private owners who now own those apartment buildings and some commercial
things. Wasn't that like
the
1880s? Like
no, this was more about in the 1920s, I think, and so on. But in any event, this did happen. I mean, one hopes that it wouldn't happen again, but yet a skeptical person could look at what's going on the Wanderers Block and the lease that has been entered into, and the hope of the soccer entrepreneurs who are hoping to have that as a permanent home. That's the kind of thing I think that legislation should probably prohibit and not allow. And I'll remind you that it was the recommendation of staff at the time when they said, well, let's try this out. They said, but it wouldn't be a good place to have a permanent soccer facility, a permanent private commercial soccer facility. And that's a kind of stealth privatization, which is close to a sell-off of the common when it's turned over for private uses and excludes informal or even formal, but nonprofit citizens from using that facility. So there are things that I think the common could do with some protecting for. Anyway.
I've used all my time, Mr. Chair, and I think we can leave it at that. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your presentation and for all of the work and hours you've obviously put into this project over many years. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about something you mentioned early on, that the Commons is one of the only examples of shared ownership and shared responsibility. Did you mean one of the only examples of a Commons in Canada? And if so, is there potential to apply for a federal recognition as a cultural landscape? It does include the Citadel. It is a unique, apparently, example in Canada of a Commons. The federal landscape designation is about the combination of a community's beliefs and its geography and its land. And I'm wondering if that type of federal recognition would perhaps give you the type of security that you're talking about and protections. Anyway, your thoughts on that, please.
Yeah, I would say that the Halifax Common is unique. Excuse me, it's not the only common. We know, for example, Lunenburg has a common that's presently under threat right now. And there certainly are other examples in this province of common that go back to a similar period of time. But it is Canada's largest and oldest common. And for your question about federal designation as a cultural landscape, first of all, I think that's more of a cachet. It's kind of like you get a little plaque. It doesn't give it any protection. And I would say as well that the federal government, I think, is very reluctant to meddle in other levels of government. So that would really be an initiative that would have to start, I would say, at the municipal level, and then go to the provincial level, and then go to the federal level.
But you're not sure it would offer any real conservation value?
Question that's being asked, of course, ask your staff, but as the author of a textbook on land use planning law, I have to say that, and a long article on federal land use regulatory powers, I don't think that even that designation is really going to be sufficient for the federal government to step in to offer any significant protection. I mean, one of the things they can do about Citadel Hill, of course, is that they're the owner of Citadel Hill, and so they have clear jurisdiction over it. And although there are lots of circumstances in which federal and provincial jurisdiction over land uses intersects and can work together cooperatively, I don't think there is anything in that aspect of the federal desire to designate something that would inhibit a province or municipalities operating with powers granted by their province from doing what they decide is the appropriate thing. So it'd be nice to have the federal blessings, especially if they would come with some money, but
Right.
That's
That's
a different thing.
Okay, all right. So we have a unique commons and the largest in Canada, but we have no real guidelines or shared understanding of how it could be managed at the moment, except for the processes that we've developed so far. Okay, thank you.
I go back a little bit to answer or to give another example for Councillor Austin's idea that it's kind of an old-fashioned thing that we would give away common. There's more recent example. The Nova Scotia Museum was a parcel of land that the city sold in, I think, the 1970s, and it was sold for the purpose of a museum, Nova Scotia Museum of Natural History. And yet we see the province take that parcel of land and use that land because they have ownership and there's no governance about what can be used for that parcel of land, and that's where they put the parking lot. And then more recently, the city would have taken ownership of the site of the former Queen Elizabeth High School site. And rather than honoring their commitment from 1994 to recapture and reclaim Halifax common land, they traded that parcel of land. And so again, that was taken away with the permission of the city. And that was actually one of our best success stories as the Friends of Halifax Common, is we worked with Capital Health to have them create the Common Roots Urban Farm there as an interim use of the space. And so again, that's that making decisions without a long-term view of how you want to have that park space available for people in our city. The farm could be there to this day if we had taken the time to complete a plan or worked with the province to have legislative protection to ensure that what we see and perceive of and own in our shared way is ours for a future. The language in the deed is to and for the inhabitants of the town of Halifax as common forever. We need to be thinking for the future.
All right, thank you. We have another question from Councillor Elhit.
Yeah, I guess this is where I sometimes get a little offside. But a hospital is a good thing. And a cancer center is a good thing for the public. I think that building a hospital and a cancer center next to a hospital is better use than a community garden on the old QEH site, sorry. Having a kid that just went through cancer. I would say that, you know, holy smokes, folks. Well, you are. You're saying it would have been better to have a community garden there instead of expanding a hospital.
No, I think you're misunderstanding what I'm saying. I'm saying that if we had a plan for the
Yeah.
use of the entire common, then we would be more integrated in what our decision-making would be.
Oh, understood.
Right, so as an example, if we are going to have more hospital building, then where is the protection, or where is the tool that we would have to have the province honor its promise to have a fully landscaped parking lot at the VG Hospital? So it's not saying one can't happen. It's saying if you back up and have a meta look at this large body of potentially green space in the city, how are you balancing the interests? So no, we're not saying don't build hospitals. We're saying we need a plan.
Oh, understood.
Yeah.
But building a hospital next to an existing hospital kind of makes sense, or expanding a hospital when you've got a province and a city that are growing. I just took a little exception to the QEH lands. Your overall vision I support very much, and your overall concerns. But using the QEH land to expand the hospital next to it seemed pretty logical to me. Anyway, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I don't see any more speakers on the list, so with that, I'll say thank you very much for the presentation. Did I hear you right? This is the first time you've presented at CPED?
Yeah, as a group, yes. Actually, Alan Ruffman, who's no longer with us, but you would all know who we're speaking of, and Howard spoke about a year and a half ago when it was the presentation about asking for this to come back to the public, and I guess that's the bottom line. That's still our ask.
Well, okay, well,
Yeah.
I'm glad you were here presenting today. You know, it's very important to have these discussions, and to your point, you know, when you come and present at a public hearing or when decisions able to, you know, a decision's being made, it's often a difficult time to get into a conversation like the one we're having today. So glad to see you here, and thank you for all the work you're doing and the passion you have for the Halifax Commons.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your time. And we have a little booklet that each of you would have gotten. That's from 2013. It was the 250th anniversary, and now this year's the 260th anniversary. So thank you.
All right, so back to our agenda here. We're on to item number 11, information items brought forward. There are none. 12 reports. We have 12.1.1, Rehab's Lands Park Plan. And for that, we have two members from our staff. We have Carol and Koziak on the list. And is there a presentation for this? Yep. Okay, great. Thank you.
Madam Chair, thank you for letting me present. I'm Carol Koziak Roberts, and I'm a landscape architect with policy and planning with Parks and Recreation. And today I'm going to present on the Rehab Lands Park Plan. So the rehab lands are situated in Cole Harbour, and it was the site of the former Halifax County Rehabilitation Centre, which provided short and long-term patient mental health care. When the institution closed in 2002, the lands reverted to the Halifax Regional Municipality, and subsequently, all the buildings have now been demolished and the sites remediated, leaving the lands largely as informal open space. The rehab lands were first identified as an important open space acquisition in the 2013 Cole Harbour Basin's Open Space Plan. And in 2016, Regional Council passed a motion to designate the 16 hectares of the 204-hectare property as parkland and to review the remaining lands under Administration Order 50 process for potential disposal. Through the Parks and Recreation Business Plan, we were directed to create a park plan for this site and also to consider an off-leash dog area for Cole Harbour, which has been identified as a site that may be able to address the service gap for this area in the municipality. So the Rehab Lands property is an open space link between the Coastal Heritage Park owned by the province and Bissett Lake Park. And it's the Bissett Active Transportation Trail was opened in 2019, and it was that first connection that connected the residential areas with the trails in the provincial park. There's also in the area a lot of other surrounding parks in the neighborhoods that provide recreation facilities such as, playgrounds and sports fields. And so what we found is that there was sort of a little need for similar type of facilities at this park. So the opportunities that the site offers is that it has a number of natural features that can be optimized in the park development, including a lot of really great views of the Cole Harbour Basin. It has access to Bissett Lake, and there's also a lot of natural wooded areas and open meadows. The site also has some challenges in which there are very steep slopes with a substantial elevation change to be able to get down to the lake area. There's about an 18-meter change, and it's very steep. There's also, during the demolition of the institution buildings, contaminated material were found sort of in the foundation of the south wing. So through the remediation work, this has been there's a containment cell that has been constructed over top that has been capped, and around that, a no-build zone that would prevent having buildings in that area. So the public engagement happened during the COVID lockdown. So most of it occurred through the Shape Your City Halifax online portal. But I was able to actually go out on site to meet with small groups and walk the site and to learn about it from people who live in the area. The engagement was designed as a two-part process where the first round was in value gathering, in which we had an exploratory question about finding out the community's recreation needs and their values. And then from that information, we developed a series of different concept options for the park. And the second round was to evaluate what the park options and see what people liked within that. And then a final preferred plan was then developed. Takeaways that we got from the engagement was that people felt that having a low impact park development is appropriate for the type of development in the site. There's lots of interest and use already in trail use, and to expand that. People were interested in more relaxation, winter-based activities, nature exploration, and also water-based activities as well. We also asked regarding the off-leash dog area as well, and there was over half were in favor of having a designated dog off-leash area. And we also heard from both dog owners and non-dog owners that fencing should be considered to reduce kind of potential conflicts between the different activities in the park. So other findings is that, expanding the trail network for different modes and levels of accessibility, working with the natural landscape to retain the woodlots and meadows and naturalize the remediated areas, and optimize vantage points for the great views that are of the surrounding area by keeping, the vantage points and the views clear, and also looking at, elevating look-off points as well. They also found that the area, is suitable for an off-leash area, and that there's also consideration for emerging recreation trends of disc golf and mountain biking that came up through the engagement process, that those are also well suited for this site as well. Providing access to the water is also important, and there's sort of the old pump house. There's the foundation pier that's there that has an opportunity to perhaps build kind of a pier that people could be able to access the lake as well. And and looking at things like there's already, good amounts of playgrounds and other sports facilities in the area. So this is kind of to look at this park as there's these other opportunities. So this is the park plan that was developed, and within this, just some of the park highlights were, within it, we've identified, where the best vantage points would be to kind of create scenic look-offs. There's areas in here that we could have like picnic areas, sort of on the top of the hill or down by the lake area. A large area on the top would be to continue to have like naturalized meadows, looking at, pollinator plants and kind of bringing in more biodiversity and working with what's already happening there. As I mentioned, number 5, like on the lake pier, there's opportunity to bring, some infrastructure there for people to be able to access the lake. We have sort of for winter activities, looking at, opportunities to have a sledding hill on the times that we do have, snow coverage. But also with winter activities, looking at things like that year-round type of activities as well that you can do that is not kind of, you need snow or ice as well. So perhaps disc golf and trails are activities that people can also do year-round. There's looking at sort of where we could put the disc golf course. It's kind of nicely spaced and generous. It would be kind of built within the trees. There's also an area for mountain biking on number 7 that could be sort of like small little loops and for skill building. Other things that came out is this idea of a meditation labyrinth, which is kind of a way that you can practice mindfulness, and it also begins to think back about the original mental health and well-being, and these are things that people can go to parks and be able to kind of have sort of that, mental health activities. The park is, one of the things that's important is that we provide parking lots to this park, and so the park plan identifies 2 areas that would be appropriate, one being sort of in a central location, and then another being closer to the trail area. And in that area, number 11, we're talking about like expansion area for future park needs that would be Once the park is established and we start to look at, how much demand or use it is, there may be things that we would need for, increasing the amount of parking, or looking at washroom facilities or water bottle facilities and things like that. So it's also looking in the future. So the other part of the motion back in 2016 was to look at, to review sort of the remainder of the property as potential disposal. And so through our park planning exercise, we reevaluated the 2 sites that were originally identified for potential disposal with a more detailed site analysis and a defined park development program. And what we're looking at is from the original area that was identified, we've sort of reduced the area for potential surplus, has been adjusted for things to look at, sort of retaining a buffer on the north side from the Bissett Trail. And also the site as well is on the south side, there's a wetland area and a pond and stream, and so looking at also creating buffers from those natural areas as well. And the plan does recognize that the south site would be, is not essential for park development, and that could be looked at as a disposal process in the short term. But the north site, we're also recommending that we kind of hold on and wait and see about how, when the park develops, whether we may need that land or not in the future. So within this park budget, there are no immediate financial implications, but what we would be doing is once this is put in place, that it would be looked at as a phased approach to building it over subsequent capital years, and it would start to be incorporated into our business planning process. And the importance is having an adopted plan in place will allow us to have applications for external funding programs, and as opportunities come forward, we have a plan in place to know how to direct money and development of this park. And this is the recommendation we have right now at the Standing Committee. So thank you. Ready for any questions?
Thank you very much, Carol, for that presentation. And I'll ask the area councillor if she'd like to put the motion on the table, on the floor.
Hello. Oh, there it is. Okay. And before I do that, I just want to acknowledge that my predecessor and my MLA is here, Laura Lee Nicol, and I know that this is very near and dear to her heart, and I know she did a lot of work in the past to make that Bissett Trail what it is today, and it is such a gem. I know, right? She knows where you live. Okay, so it's my pleasure to put this on the floor. I move that the Community Planning and Economic Development Standing Committee recommend that Halifax Regional Council, 1, adopt the Rehab Lands Park Plan as a guiding document for future improvements to 255 Bissett Road. 2, approve a dedicated off-leash dog area as identified on map 6 of the Rehab Lands Park Plan to be incorporated and subsequently designed as part of the development of park facilities upon the rehab lands. And 3, refer the potentially surplus lands, which have been identified as surplus in Attachment A, Site Plan, to the disposal process set forth in Administrative Order Number 50 respecting the disposal of surplus real property, with the size, configuration, and timing of such disposals to be subject to further review as identified in the staff report dated April 12th, 2023. So moved. Second. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Blackburn. And thank you for this plan. I know this was getting started when I first came on, and I remember having that meeting with you and just being overwhelmed by the process and all the ideas that were coming forward and the engagement of the community. And of course, it was during COVID, so people were really interested in outdoor options for a family, for exercise, just for mental health. So we know the importance of this. And being a park trail walker myself in these parks, and I love the Bissett Trail. I used to have to walk on the busy Bissett Road, cross the street to get there before the beautiful AT Trail was designed and implemented. There has been an increase in bodies on the trails and families using the trails, a marked increase. And so I love all of the different options that you have for this parkland. I think it's going to be the best park in HRM. We have everything here. Meditation, except for budget. Yeah, well, we gotta work on that one. Everything, the mountain biking, training trails, the disc golf, which actually one of our disc golf gurus in HRM took me on a little disc golf, my first time playing on those lands. Actually, he was showing me what a great idea it would be to incorporate disc golf into the park. So I'm so thrilled that that got incorporated. And I was happy to see too that it's you're starting with a half course with the potential to increase that to a full course. So that was nice to see. I just had a question about the surplus land. Why is it necessary to have surplus land on this park land? Is it necessary? I was just wondering, why can't it be kept as parkland? Well, especially the south side, because I know the north side you're recommending to wait on that because of the Halifax water, what they're going to be doing or not doing in 2025. And then the two concerns that came to me immediately was, of course, the parking need, which on those beautiful days, those holiday days, those weekend days, it's full to capacity, over capacity at, of course, the Heritage Trail there. So I think that you address that in your park plans. I mean, I think you've got good parking planning, I believe. And the other concern, of course, which is a concern of many of the residents in District 4, which is that intersection at Bissett Road, because on those busy, beautiful days where the beach is opened and people are going to the trails, that intersection to get out of Bissett Road back into Cole Harbour is very backed up, and it can take people 45 minutes. And residents who live along there, are hearing the roadway rage and the blaring music and the kids screaming, and it just makes some weekend days a little tiresome for folks. So those were the two concerns. And then the timeline. I liked how you broke it up into the 3 phases of potential implementation. Great. Awesome.
Councillor Purdy, I just want to note that your time is up. Finish your question, but just.
I don't think I've ever gone to my full time ever speaking. That's amazing. Sorry. Okay, so just the timeline. I was wondering, can we get is it just solely based on the capital budget? Is that what will be influencing the timeline of this? And I'm done. Sorry for going over.
Okay, thank you. So related to the timeline, so what this is once this is put in, then on our as we start looking at our next business plan, we would be looking, about how much that we could be able to put towards this one based on all our other park priorities plans as well throughout the municipality. So yes, there is that kind of that next part of doing the business planning and taking a look at this as part of, what our whole work plan, for other things as well. So I can't really speak to that. That's a process that's going forward. The parking, yes, there is. I mean, the site will have parking, and so that's why the park was park plan was looking at, different options and also looking at where could we expand, where's the best location for parking, wanting to keep, usually, the best lands for actual park and open space, but there is the need for that. And as well with that intersection, that's going to continue. It is popular, and that, will need to be addressed with that as well. Is it necessary to have surplus lands to sell off? I think what it is that was what was in the motion in 2016, and so that's why it's still in there. So whether we need to look at that as potential revenue, whether it makes sense today, that's something that council can look at.
Okay, I'm going to come back with that because I have another question, but I'll wait.
All right, thank you. Next, we have Councillor Blackburn.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you so much for the presentation. I guess I've got a better sense of what the path is to get this into the capital plan. So I guess the surplus land sale, that's not sort of contingent on funding this. You're not looking at the sale of these surplus lands as a way of funding this overall project. That was question one. And the other question I had was, it kept talking about lake pier and water access, but I haven't heard public boat launch, so I'm guessing that you're meaning that this is more of a sort of a dock area for canoes and kayaks and not for motorized boats. Those were just my two questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, to you, the councillor. The funding for the project is not contingent on selling those lands in that respect, but if there was something, it could be looked at towards putting it towards the park. And in regards to the water access, so there is a boat launch across the lake in Bissett Park.
Okay.
So this would really be about people who already had like kayaks or paddleboards who want to kind of paddle over to the rehab lands, dock, and maybe go for some disc golf, things like that. The land itself is very steep, and it would not be very easy to get trailered down, boats down in there.
Yeah.
So
I think it would ruin the whole vibe anyway.
it would, yeah.
Meditation doesn't go well with motorboats. Thank you very much for the clarification.
All right, thank you, Councillor Blackburn. Next, we have Deputy Mayor Austin.
Thank you, Ms. Chair, and thank you to staff for all the work on this. I know it's been a long time coming. The dog piece, if memory serves in the report, the off-leash area, the intent would be this would be that regional level type facility, and it would be fenced?
Yes,
I know we don't fence them typically.
Yeah, that would be correct. So it would be a dedicated area, and I think the fence was sort of a way to mark where dogs are on leash and off leash, because right now there's a lot of trails that people can have their dogs on leash on, but this would be, as you kind of enter that area, it would say this is off leash. So it's fencing as sort of like just to those cues, and to be very deliberate on where you can or cannot have a dog off leash.
Cool. This is very, very minor. It's just where the brain went when I saw the spiral. I think that's a good way to do the look off. But make sure if that one goes ahead that you put a path directly to the top, because guaranteed there'll be a mud rut that goes directly to it of people who will not do the spiral, who are going to do the straight up the bank, right? I've seen those kind of things around, and that's inevitably what you end up happening. Then that's the point that you get the erosion, and people don't necessarily just follow that. The piece I wanted to kind of talk about a little bit more was the surplus sites. I don't think we should surplus the south site at all at this point. It looks like, just eyeballing it, you'd sell that. I don't imagine that we would, like, I think a surplus, we, as a municipality, I think we probably need to start being more strategic about our surplusing, because we surplus properties, sell them, and then let someone else go through all the rezoning, like, other orders of government, like the feds have Canada Lands, where they try and capture that value. We don't. And so when I look at this, it's like, well, what would be the potential? If we sold this, someone would buy it, maybe there's 4 houses that get built here. That's not going to be any kind of consequential, whereas once we give up the land, it's gone forever. So I see what colleagues have to say, but I feel like we should vote for 1 and 2 and just vote down 3 and just hold on to this. I don't think that there's enough really that we would get back from letting go of this chunk of property myself. And I guess maybe that's a question for staff. If we voted down 3 to not surplus these properties, would that be enough to indicate the intent, or would we actually need some kind of alternative motion?
That is a very good question, Councillor. Maybe when we want to consult with legal on in terms of whether there needs to be a motion of rescission from the previous direction from council, or would it be just an amendment of, no?
I'll save my argument for after legal.
I'd have to look back at the kind of how it got here, but the motion before you is recommending action to regional council, right? So if it was the wishes of the committee to recommend against a certain action, you likely could do that. We just want to make sure when it got to regional council that the recommendation was correct in terms of whether or not there needed to be a rescission or anything like that. But we'd have to go back and look at how it got here in the first place. That might take a little bit of time.
If memory serves, I mean, I think how it got to this on the surplus was more, we want you to look at this. And so now you've brought the recommendation saying, well, you could surplus these properties. So I don't think that would trigger any rescission.
Right.
That would just be, okay, we looked at it and council decides we like that or we don't like that.
Right, so council will get this staff report, but it will also get a recovery report with what this committee decided or is recommending. So that's the wish of the committee, right?
Okay, my apologies, I shouldn't be doing these things on the fly. Would it be better to vote, if you don't want to surplus these lands, would it be better to just vote down 3, or should we amend 3 to recommend, like if the committee wanted to not surplus them, should we try and amend the main motion to say not surplus these? Or would that just be too contrary to the motion?
I'm looking at item 3 now, and the lands have been identified as surplus in attachment A, the site plan. So maybe this is a question back to staff, whether or not there would need to be a supplementary report to amend that before it goes forward.
Madam Chair, Richard Harvey, Manager of Policy and Planning. If you look at the origin section of the staff report you have, what you'll see where this stems from, the motion from council at the time was to surplus the lands and undertake a park plan. So I think that's just to offer a bit of clarity. So I think what you'd be doing as a committee is you would be advising council potentially that be reviewed, considered. I think what you would do then from the covering memo perspective and at regional council would then need to decide what it does with its original motion. But I think that's where this stems from.
Yeah, I agree. So in that covering memo, when we do our review internally and our staff review, we'll decide whether or not there needs to be a rescission. We'll have to go back and look at the minutes from the original motion that came from council.
Okay.
So here you just excuse me, I think just making your recommendation one way or another, and then whether or not there's further action that needs to be taken by council, we should be able to cover that in the covering report that goes.
Okay. So for now, if you don't like surplus, I could ask that we split them and we just vote down 3, and that would be sufficient to express the committee's will to council? Okay. Well, if that's what I would like to do, then is to split and vote on 3 separately.
Okay, and do we vote it down, or do we vote, like, I'm just looking at the wording here, it says that we recommend, so would we, like, not recommend to regional council? Or, like, how
If the
does that
vote,
voting
if
down
the, if the
go?
vote is not to recommend, then the covering memo will say, Community Planning Economic Development Standing Committee did not recommend that
Number 3.
item 3 proceed.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Does that make sense? Yeah,
I think so.
okay, you're gonna put it on the floor?
My apologies, committee, I should have floated all this ahead of time.
No, okay, well, are you gonna move?
Well, I don't think there's anything to move. I'm just asking that when we conclude,
Vote?
that we vote on 3 separately from 1 and 2, split the motion so that I
right.
can vote against 3.
Okay.
Anyone else
Can
who
I just-
thinks surplusing might be not a great idea.
Excellent. Yeah, Maggie?
Sorry, I just want to make sure, does that then give council the indication of what the committee wants to do, though, in terms of the surplus, is what I want to make sure? Or can we address that, is what you're saying, we can address that in the covering memo? In terms of that, you know, we wouldn't then be surplusing any of the land, is what the committee is looking for, right? Just want to confirm that gives enough direction, that council understands what it needs to do, based on the recommendation of the committee.
Sorry, Trish, I derailed the whole meeting.
Yes, you could amend it if you want to say not refer the lands, but it's essentially the same thing, to vote it down, or to not
clearer
put it
then
forward.
to-
Yeah, if you want to, you can amend it.
I could have
But
moved
then you'll
it.
have to decide whether it's a friendly amendment or we're going to, you know, it's not friendly. So we're going to have to vote on the amendment if you want to put that on the floor.
So I would like to move then that we amend 3 to not surplus the lands?
Yeah. Yeah? Okay, so we've had that moved by Deputy Mayor Austin, seconded by Councillor Purdy. Now, is this, can we consider if this is a friendly amendment, or, no, we have to vote on it? Okay, so we have to vote on it. Does anyone want to speak to it? So I guess Katie here, we're going to need a new speakers list. There we go. All right. Councillor Oudhan.
Thank you, and I'm just a little worried we're rushing into a mistake here, because I'll tell you, this is just going to be another plan that sits on the shelf with no money behind it and no timeline behind it. And remember that nice study we did in West Bedford of what we need in division and whatnot for recreation? We've done a couple of things, but there's still a lot more to do. And in fact, Pam and I have to even come up with the money to put the pump track in there on the land that we're trying to acquire. So, to me, you sell off some surplus land, you change and we've done this several times lately, is you actually sell it or surplus it when you have the zoning on it that you want. And maybe that means it's more than 4 houses. Maybe you look at an LIC, maybe you look at a whatever. But my worry is that if you just pass this the way it is, it's just another really nice vision that's going to sit on the shelf with no money towards it. And how soon, yes, I realize it's going to be phased in, but I mean, when you look at what we've done, so West Bedford, frankly, has taken far too long. And it's very frustrating to me that we still, you build a town and you still have so little for anybody to do. And we left money on the table there, I think, from CCCs and other things. So I'm trying to learn from that for new places in Dartmouth. And you look at, one of the reasons why we were able to do the library would have cost $60 million, the new central library, but we sold land, we had reserves, we had partnerships. That's what moved it up in priority and also moved it ahead in paying for it. Now, obviously, that's a huge scale compared to this. But to say, well, let's not surplus the land, is almost like throwing our hands up and saying, well, someday we'll just find a way to do this in the capital budget over a number of phases. I say, I wouldn't rule out selling the land. I wouldn't rule out putting some zoning on it that makes it more valuable. And maybe by doing that, you move it a little, not only do you have a partial funding source, but you move it a little further in the queue. because you can come to council, the councillor from the area can come to council and say, we can leave this on the books, you know, waiting 100% funded for 5 or 10 or 15 years, or here's a little money towards it, here's some partnerships for it, here's some whatever, and let's move this forward. Anyway, just a concern I have, because it's, you know, we have so many beautification plans, we have so many streetscaping plans, we have so many visionings that have been passed over the years, and we all love them, and of course I'll support this, it's wonderful. But without a budget, or without a funding source, or without a timeline for a budget, you're setting expectations in your community that you can't really look them in the eye right now, councillor, and tell them if this is going to happen a year from now or 15 years from now. Anyway, just a thought.
All right, thank you. Councillor Smith?
Thank you, Chair. So I'm happy we're at this point of the amendment, because I was going to nitpick at what was happening with the process, because I think Deputy Mayor was right initially, because when I look at the origin motion, number 3 says direct staff to review the remainder of the property under Administrative Order 50. It doesn't, I don't see the direction where we said to determine lands as surplus. So but this amendment, from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, will then, if passed the way it is, will go to council as to not deem it as surplus?
To not refer to the surplus process, right?
Right.
The disposal process set out in the administrative order. So that's what regional council will have to decide, whether or not they put forward those specific lands as surplus pursuant to that process that's set out under the administrative order.
Right.
But this committee, if you voted in the affirmative on the motion, or the amended motion, would be saying, we don't think that's a good idea, so not to do that.
Right.
But it's still council's decision when it gets to council.
Right, but will the original motion change that goes to council from this amendment? The motion that's on the floor now, and if the amendment gets passed, that motion is going to council rather than, wait, I think I'm explaining it wrong.
Item 3 would change to not
Right.
refer.
Okay.
Right? Right now, the recommendation is, the recommendation is to refer, and there's a motion on the floor to amend that to say not to refer. So to not support a referral of the surplus property, of the property as surplus.
Right. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that was clear for my own sake, so thank you. Thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you. Deputy Mayor Austin?
I think I've kind of spoken on it.
yeah.
I probably should.
Okay. Councillor Purdy?
Thank you. So just 2 questions about that, and I appreciate Councillor Outhitt's comments on this, because that's why I asked about the timeline is very vague. I mean, we all want this to start right away, of course, but we need the money. My question is, what's the guarantee that the revenue from any surplus land would go to this project anyway? I don't think we have that guarantee with any surplus monies that we would receive from that. And also, I was also going to ask about, okay, so the north property, that I guess the Halifax Water property, because you recommended that kind of be held. I was just wondering what is if this amendment doesn't go through, what's the guarantee that north potential surplus property that is now the Halifax Water land would be held for a potential parking, facilities, rest stop, that's kind of envisioned in the plan without this amendment? Could that be snatched away if and when they decide to move locations?
So there is the Halifax Water, a property that is just north of the Rehab Lands property that Halifax Water has indicated that they would no longer use, and that could also go into surplus. potentially. So the question is, with your question is the land on the rehab lands, if we hold on, and we could decide at a later date to surplus that when we have more understanding of the demand for the park. So I think the timing of it, I'm not sure if I can answer whether this amendment would say that we won't consider that ever, or if that might be considered at a later date.
Okay, and to that point, who decides whether the land will be sold as surplus? Like, who makes that decision? We do, Regional Council. On the recommendation from who? From planning staff, not real estate staff. Right. Yeah. Okay. I just, well, we just heard from the Backlands Coalition, and this is a beautiful, beautiful property. It's amazing, and to be able to, I was thinking of the Southlands there. I mean, disc golf in Hammonds Plains is very, very popular from what I hear. And there is a real need for a full course and somewhere else in HRM. And I mean, Cole Harbour is a nice, two ends of the, well, not really ends of the municipality, but they're far enough apart to be really utilized. We need to keep the Southlands for potential expansion of this disc golf course. We just don't have the room if we don't. So I will be supporting this amendment to not refer these properties for disposal. And there's plans for the north site as well in this park proposal for future uses. So I think they're going to be needed. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councillor Purdy. And Deputy Mayor Austin, I see you on the list here again. Yeah?
Second go around, yeah. So, I guess when I look at it, I think of Star Park in my district, right? When that land, this old Star site came into HRM, there was the big, well, let's surplus a section of this to help pay for it. And, that's not a bad goal, right? Try and say, well, do we really need all this land? At Star, we sold the section in the middle, and now we got the Lock 4 at Star condo built there. And every single person who's looked at it ever since has kicked themselves for that decision, because it's the reason we couldn't daylight things fully through there. It's been nothing but, the condo's in the way of everything we would now like to do with that property. And what we got out of that was a measly $400,000, right? Which was a drop in the proverbial bucket. What we lost an opportunity versus what we got was really, it was a terrible trade. And so when I think about surplus property, when we're going to do these things, because once we give up the land, it's gone forever. The section, the south side piece of the rehab lands, my understanding, it doesn't have water, sewer out there. I'm seeing the area councilor and the MLA are both shaking their heads. So you're not going to be able to upzone that. It's adjacent to the mountain bike area. It's near the future disc golf. That land could actually have a lot more useful public purpose as this park gets developed. Maybe we can build the park and at the end of it say, you know what, that truly is surplus, let's get rid of it. But I think to carve it off now for the very tiny public benefit that we would get from selling it just doesn't ring true. The north side piece, where it's next to the Halifax Water, the recommendation was to not immediately rush ahead with that anyway, because we wanted to see what the park is. Maybe that's where there's more potential, right? If we combine with Halifax Water, maybe, not to scare the area councilor or anything, but maybe that's where you're upzoning to allow some kind of smaller multi-unit type building up there, and you're actually netting a significant cash benefit back to the municipality to offset some of the costs, as well as doing good planning of, putting people next to a park, where they could walk out to Cole Harbour Road to get the bus, versus that south side piece, which is, very much destined as low density, kind of any way you kind of look at it from now. So I think we should proceed with building the park, right? You know, if there was an immediate kind of benefit at the north side where, you know, we could rezone, where maybe we're going to net some public benefit back, then I'd be more, you know, I'd find the surplus recommendation more fulfilling. It just doesn't feel like there's enough in it here for us while we're building the park. So I think we should recommend to regional that we just keep the properties for now. Thank you.
Thanks. If you'll indulge me, let me speak from the chair here about this. You know, I feel like we don't have any real data on this. Like, we don't know how much that land is worth. We don't know what its potential is. I don't know what the future growth plan for the area is. I don't know if water and sewer will be going out there. I don't even know how much this park is going to cost us. I don't know if we sell that land where the money will go specifically to enable the development of all of our parks plans. You know, like you said, we have a number of them, and how do we fund them? So, well, you know, I'm not familiar with this area, and you know, I get your point. Like, what's, you know, Deputy Mayor, about, you know, why would we sell off land that doesn't have a lot of value? Like, what are we really getting for it? I don't really know what we would get for it, because there's no information. I mean, even in the staff report about, you know, not having the financial implications right now, I mean, we don't even have a ballpark. And not that we don't have a ballpark in the park, we don't have a ballpark. We don't have a ballpark figure of what this even costs. You know, to Councillor Elhit's point, we keep, you know, approving these great things, and we're looking at them in silos. And, you know, you can't say that this isn't a wonderful plan. It is a wonderful plan. It's amazing. But I don't have, you know, not only do I not have the financial information to say, okay, we're adding this to a list that will never get built. I don't know if this is a $1 million park or a $5 million park. I don't know what we're approving here. So, you know, it does make me nervous that we do keep approving things kind of blindly without really understanding what it will cost and where the funding will come from. I do note that you said you would be looking at other sources of funding from, you know, grants and programs, which I get, and I think, you know, that's fine, you know, to note those things. But it's nice to know, like, just ballpark, you know, what are we talking here about what we need, and, you know, before we make a decision about not including the surplus lands, is there a way to get some information, you know, on what the options of those two sites are in terms of their value or even their potential value? I don't know if, Carol, if you have any comments or thoughts about that.
I think if we start to look at we don't have that data right now to provide, but that is something that we would have to go back and take a look at and look at, you know, what would be the value of those lands. What also would be with the design of the park, there's you know, further work we need to do. Particularly, the parking lots are sort of probably the most significant piece of the cost of this park, and we would have to do some, you know, geotechnical investigations about the design of the parking lot and things like that, and where we could have cost pieces to that. So, like right now, I can't give you kind of a ballpark with that, but it's something that we would look at as pieces and kind of putting in those essential parts first, and we would be able to come back with more detailed design so that we would have costs as we bring forward in the business plans.
Really approving this mostly in concept then, not in an expenditure at this point.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Elhit.
Thank you, Chair. And listening to the comments from the councillor from the area and also from the Deputy Mayor, I mean, I certainly will be supporting this, but And maybe something will come with the lands in the north down the river. That's fine. I don't know the area well enough, but I was just worried about the concept of the concept. Yeah, it scares me a little. I'm wondering, I mean, I would feel, and I thought, Madam Chair, you explained this very well. I mean, should we send this back and say, give us some give us some estimated cost for this, give us some funding source ideas for this, or more? I just, and believe it or not, Councillor, I'm thinking of you on this, because we've all been caught with, we put another vision on the table with no timelines or budget behind it, and then the calls start coming, when is the Bedford Highway functional plan going to happen? How far along is the ferry? How far along is the whatever in West Bedford? Been there, taking the shots. Would it be helpful, Maggie, if we sent this back and say, take this a little further, look at some costs, look at some funding opportunities, look at some partnerships a little more closely? So it's a concept, but it's a little bit more than a vision is different than a plan. A plan usually has a little more meat to it, a funding source and costs. But, I mean, I'll support it, but are we doing the right thing?
Through the chair to the committee, my recommendation would be to approve the plan so that we have the concept going forward. I mean, I think about different parks plans that we have, for example, around Eastern Passage. It allows us to sort of work into the capital plan projects like a skate park there that, sort of fit into an overall plan for a park, recognizing that, yes, we have work to do, sort of, and the team is working on it in terms of how do we kind of pull all of the park plans together so we have a good understanding of how to prioritize projects over time. It's challenging. The demand obviously far exceeds our capacity to respond to it, so that's always going to be a challenge. Certainly, we can go, I shouldn't say easily, we can go away and do more detail, provide more detail on cost estimates. Again, part of the challenge is that changes so much over time, and in terms of how we have to sort of manage it in the context of the capital budget, which is where sort of council gets its other kick at the can in terms of how these things get prioritized. So, I recognize that we still have work to do in terms of how we're prioritizing all our capital projects, but would recommend that we don't hold up the approval of a concept in order just to be able to.
All right, well, I will support that with a little pragmatic concern about the next step.
All right, thank you. Councillor Stoddard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was also going to weigh in with what Deputy Mayor Austin and Madam Chair that you mentioned. My position was to hold off for now on this surplus land, because if we jump ahead and we need it in the future, it's gone. And if we hold off and we do need it, it's still there for our using. And then at that point, if we need it, it'll be there for us. But if we sell it off, then it's gone. And I'd just like to weigh in on that, please.
Yeah. No, you're actually correct that, I mean, if we do surplus it now and we do need it at a later time, it is gone. Right. So the question is timing of when to consider that, with the park development, if it's needed or not. It would, be a benefit to start developing the park, see how the use is happening, and if we do need that land or not.
Right. Yeah, I would agree. Once the design process is there, at least, as I said, we'd have the lot if we need it. And if we don't need it, we can always sell at a later date. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Question has been asked. On the amendment, question on the amendment, which is not recommending 3 of the main motion. Amending it to not refer it. Thank you. Question. Oh, I'm waiting for a light on my thing console to happen. Yes, of course. All in favor. Opposed? All right, that passes. Okay, so now we're back to the main motion as amended. Is there any more discussion? I just want to note that it's almost 12:15, so we've gone a little bit over time here, but we don't need a motion to continue apparently. But back to, there was a speaker list on the main motion as amended. Is there any more comment? You're fine. I did have one question, and it's about the off-leash park next to a lake, and particularly with the slope that exists in this park that's going down to the lake. You know, I noticed there's been issues in other places where having dogs next to lakes are causing environmental concerns and issues to the water quality. I'm just wondering if that was considered at all in this concept.
Yes, we did have a look at sort of the proximity of it, and there's a substantial buffer of natural vegetation that would be between the lake and the off-leash dog area, and also in the grading that you would look at it so that you wouldn't be having any water or any type of kind of issues from the dog park. There's a lot of kind of biosolutions to be able to take up that waste before it would actually meet the lake.
Okay, thank you for that. And if there's no other comments from the committee, then I will call for the vote on the main motion as amended. All those in favor? All those opposed? None. The motion carries. All right, excellent. And I just want to say thank you to MLA Nichols for coming, and it's nice to see you here in the gallery. Next on the agenda here, we have item 12.1.2, update People, Planet, Prosperity, Halifax's inclusive economic strategy. There is no staff presentation on this. Somebody like to move this? Yep, all right, Councillor Alhood.
The Chair, and I'm happy to move that the Community Planning and Economic Development Standing Committee forward the staff report dated March 13th, 2023 to Regional Council for information. So move.
Seconded by Councillor Blackburn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? All right, that motion carries. On to 13 motions. I have none. In camera, none. Added items, none. Notices of motion. Are there any notices of motion? None. Public participation. Is there anyone here? Oh. We do. Oh, your patience. Thank you for your patience today. Welcome. Please just state your name and
Madam Chair, through you to the rest of the committee and others present, my name is Scott Guthrie, and not new to council. I've been here, but it's been quite a while since my last presence, and this will be on a little bit of different subject from my presence. And just here, first I want to applaud all the wonderful things that are happening. I mean, at this committee today, everything that's being talked about is what community needs. We need more space, we need more activity, we need more participation, and ways to bring nature back into our society in a leap forward. More specifically, I am here today as a member of the disc golf community in support of the concept plan at Bissett Lake, and to speak towards our support and our desperate need for more disc golf courses in HRM. I'll start off with a few little stats today, and just to show where HRM is today and compared to the rest of North America and the rest of Canada in respect to disc golf. Currently in Canada, there's over 400 disc golf courses, 80% of which are publicly funded and supported. HRM has 0. We have one disc golf course in HRM. It's on private land, and of the extreme generosity of the property owner, As we know, with anything, we do not foresee any changes, but with anything when we're dealing with private lands, that could disappear tomorrow. So as HRM, we need to secure lands that are publicly accessible for one of the fastest growing, most diverse sports in public today. COVID was an extreme change to the disc golf community. Disc golf's been around now since the early 1980s, originated out of Winnipeg, Manitoba. Originally it was called Tin Lid, where a bunch of kids got together and threw paint can lids into circles. And the first disc golf course evolved from there actually into California, and it grew to what it is today. Unfortunately, the name golf being absorbed into disc golf gives public a misrepresentation of what it's about. It's a very environmentally friendly, affordable, and spreads across wide demographics of who can participate. I've played disc golf with everyone from the age of 6 to 80 and compete nationally, and hopefully we'll make it to the Worlds at some point. I'm an amateur player. I'm not the best, but I'm doing okay. Just into some big city stats. We're the only big city in Canada that does not have a municipal funded disc golf course. We're way behind the curveball on this one. Most popular course in Canada right now is in Calgary, Alberta, which last year had 27,663 rounds played on UDisc. UDisc is an app that is used by some disc golf players. They basically say that that encompasses about 30% of the active disc golf users on a course. So you can do the math on that one. A quick touch on what happened here last summer over in our Deputy Mayor's district at Dartmouth Commons. We had a temporary pilot project course pop up into the Dartmouth Commons. And at that course, last year, in the sole 4 months of its activity on UDisc, was 5,235 rounds played. So doing the math of about 30% users, that's over 17,000 people, or 17,000 rounds of disc golf were played on that course in a short 4 months. Compare that to Hammonds Plains, which has been there since 2016. It's a much more advanced course. It's a little bit out of the way. And last year, Hammonds Plains is the most popular course in Nova Scotia. Last year, 6,487 rounds were played at Hammonds Plains. But that's in a full scope of a full year. As the presenter had mentioned, disc golf is a 24/7, 365 days a year activity. I played all winter, snowshoes, ribbons, finding our discs underneath the snow. It's open and accessible to everybody, and incredibly very, very affordable. There is no pay-to-play courses in Nova Scotia. All you really need is a couple Frisbees. Now, if you get into the competitive side, it gets a little bit more detailed. But obviously, I got 30 seconds, so I got to hurry up. My point is, I also support the withholding of the surplus land. Right now, HRM is missing out on a huge opportunity. Last year at the Canadian Nationals in Prince Edward Island, the economic impact into Prince Edward Island was close to $500,000 of over 200 members going to play, their families, their friends, the spectators, countries from all over the world. And this year is probably going to surpass that once again with the Discmania Open, which is going to be happening in PEI again this year. We're missing that economic opportunity. Those folks that showed up in PEI were there for 7 days, housing, lodging, tourism, all of it was taken in. Those events cannot be held in Halifax because we do not have the infrastructure to hold them. Thank you.
All right.
And if I may just add one last thing, and in comparison to cities around North America, a sister city the size of Halifax has 22 courses on average. We have one private course. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Guthrie. Any questions, Councillor Blackburn? I mean, well, we don't have any questions of.
Oh, okay. This was actually a question for staff, but I can.
No. Sorry, we can ask that. We can ask that later.
I'll take it offline. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry.
Working life. Apologies.
Welcome, MLA Nichols. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and I just wanted to thank the committee for this support that was, I know that the capital plan is a major source, and like I said to staff around me, if it weren't for that, the park would be done already, because it's been long in coming. When you refer to a plan that was done in 2009, 2013, and we're in 2023, it's, like it's 10 years since we had that discussion. And it was not, it's not lost on me that the only person in the room that was at the initial discussion is Councillor Oudhead, where finances was the biggest problem, and I had the hardest time getting council to support this whole parcel of land not being developed, and to have it for, and to honor the people that call that place home. And I'm thankful that staff have heard that. Those are the people that I heard from the most, that wanted to honor the forgotten people that lived. It originated, Cole Harbour was known to be, had the poor farm where people were unwanted, were sent. And the rehab hospital came from that. So therefore, I just spoke with someone, I just happened to meet with her on Monday, not realizing she was an employee of the former rehab property, and was very glad to see that this was done. So the whole aspect of the mental health piece was very big for that reason. So the meditation and all those areas that are being, contemplated on this parcel is in honor of that. And I'm hoping that there will be, maybe some signage in some way that's going to sort of express that to people. The disc golf piece was not an area that was identified right from the beginning, and if anyone had stood on that property, you would know that the contemplative piece was what was needed. And I will share with you that 2 weeks before Constable Heidi Stevenson was killed, she contacted me with a real need and saw the need for the mental health piece on that property, because she said in this day and age, mental health is critical, and to have a space like that for residents to go to is very important. Unknown to me that the tragedy that happened 2 weeks later. So these are all things that can be reflected upon on this property. So I just want to thank you for passing it on to council, and I'm hopeful that council will be supportive of what you're putting forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming today and speaking to us. With that, are there any more people who would wish to participate? Nope. All right. Then the next meeting of Community Planning and Economic Development is May 18th, 2023. And with that, I will ask for adjournment. Thank you, Councillor Oudhead.